In this tutorial, you'll learn how to build a beautiful responsive navbar with Bootstrap 5. To illustrate the navbar in Bootstrap, I created a simple project here. So this is the HTML, it's actually just a boilerplate and I've included the Bootstrap library. So I'm linking to the CSS portion here and I'm linking to the JavaScript portion here. I'm using the defer attribute so it's not blocking the rest of the page while it's building the page. And I'm also linking to my own custom style sheet because as you know with Bootstrap, it doesn't cover everything. Sometimes you have to write some CSS yourself, right? So it's really important actually that you have mastered the underlying fundamentals. Those are CSS and JavaScript itself. I have courses on those, definitely check those out if you want to take those skills to an advanced level. Okay, so it's currently empty, right? So we don't see anything yet. And now we're gonna use some Bootstrap components to fill out our page. So Bootstrap has these components and the navbar component is just one of them. And it's a pretty complicated one. So this is an example in code. You can see it has many different classes like navbar expand, navbar toggler, collapse, navbar collapse. You're not going to remember all of those classes, right? You're not going to memorize these. So I see some people, they try to code a navbar from scratch, but I think that's a bad idea. It's better to go to the documentation, copy one of their examples, and then just modify it to get exactly what you need. Right, so that's what I would do, right? So that's what we're gonna do, right? So now we want a navbar, so we're gonna Google for bootstrap docs. Now be careful when you do this because for me, the first link is actually linking to an older version, 4.1, right? So here I'm getting the older version, so make sure that you get the right or most up-to-date version. So this one is just their homepage and this will always show the newest version. So currently it's 5.2. You're going to be watching this at a later date. So, you may have a slightly different version, but it's going to be the same probably. So it will work even if it's like 5.3 or whatever. Right. So this is how I'm including it via CDN. And then you can go to docs and then here they have components, right? And we want the navbar component, right? So you can scroll down, they explain how it works, but usually what you just want to do is you want to get some basic examples. So this would be a basic example of their navbar, and this is the code for that. So what I would do in the real world is I would copy this code and I would then modify it to get exactly what I need, right? So I'm just going to paste this code right here. You can see even the basic example is already quite a bit. You're not going to memorize this, right? So please don't, start coding this from scratch. Just copy it from somewhere. So when I do that and we go back and refresh, we already have a basic navbar and it's even responsive out of the box. So you can see on wider screens or wider viewports, this is the navbar that we have now. And on smaller devices, you can see that we have a hamburger menu, and when you click on it, it also works, right? So it rolls out like this, right? So this is the basic example. So now we can modify it to get exactly what we need. So let's say that we don't need anything with disabled, right? So let's remove this disabled link. So I would go in here, right? So if we look at the structure, we'll go over it in a second, but we basically have three parts in here. We have the brand, right? So I'm just going to add some space here. Then we have this button. This is actually the button that you see to toggle this, as it's called, right? Showing and then hiding it and then showing it again. That's called toggling, and you toggle this with this button. So this button is responsible for the toggling. So this is the toggler. And then in here, this is the actual set of links, basically. So here, I'm just going to remove this disabled one because this is not really what we need here. So I'm going to save here and then just refresh. Let's see, now it should be gone. Right, so now we just have three links. They already have hover effects. There's a lot of built-in functionality, a lot of subtle functionalities already built in once you start using Bootstrap and you use those examples. Okay, so let's start looking at this, how we can change this and just get a feel for how this works. So let's talk about the colors. The color scheme here by default is light, right? So you can already see it's a light background and the text is dark, right? Now, if you want a dark theme, then here we go to the outermost class. And what you want to do is you want to say navbar dark. And we also want to remove this class of BG light, right? So Bootstrap has so-called utility classes, right? So those are classes that are not only, you know, part of a certain component, but that you can use in different places as well. So let's see utilities, right? So here there are certain classes that you can use for the background, right? So by default, that example included BG light, right? So it was light, but now we removed that class and we added our own class of navbar dark. When you do that, the text actually becomes white, but we want a dark background as well. So what we can do here is add BG dark. This is a utility class, so you need to add that yourself, right? Now the text is light because we say navbar dark, right? That's what makes the text light, because now it's a dark theme, right? So the text needs to be light in order to be visible. But we do need to make the background dark ourselves. I think that's a little bit confusing. I think when you add navbar dark, it should automatically make the background dark as well. But for some reason, we have to do that with the utility class, right? So BG dark is what I'm using here. You can use it for other components as well. You can also use one of these classes, but you know, typically you don't want some random green color, right, as your background color here. And actually, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. So that's how you can work with the theme, still works with responsiveness. Okay, so one of the most common things you want to do is you want to have these links on the right side. So we're going to align this to the right. So the way that works is, let's see, we have these set of links, right? So they're sitting in a UL here, navbar nav, and we want this list not to sit on the left side here, but all the way on the right side. Now, the element that it's sitting in, this navbar collapse, this is actually a so-called flex container. So its display property is set to flex, and I can prove that to you by going to inspect, but you're just gonna have to believe me for a second. So that makes this a flex item. And one of the things that you can do with a flex item is add margin auto. You can always add margin auto, but it has some special behavior in Flexbox. So here what we can do is on this list, on the left side of it, we want to add auto margin. And what that will do is it will add margin to all the available space, which will push itself to the right. Right, so it's going to add margin to the left of itself, and as much margin as possible, which will push itself all the way to the right. Now we don't say margin left, right? So there's not something like ML in Bootstrap, because there are some languages out there that are right to left, right? So they have the opposite direction in terms of text. So there's an abstraction. Instead of left, we say margin start. Right, and on the right side we have margin end, right? So here it's not margin left, but margin start, and then it's auto, right? So when I do this and go back, now it's aligned to the right, right? And the responsiveness is still working. Okay, another common thing that you want to change sometimes is the point at which it should become the hamburger menu, right? So right now, you know, at a pretty large width, it already starts to become this hamburger menu, and maybe we want it to be like for quite some time before it becomes the hamburger menu. And actually, Bootstrap is mobile first, so it has a so-called mobile first philosophy. So from their perspective, you start off like this, and you decide at which point it expands, right? So they call this expanding. Right, so we're expanding the menu now, right? So right now you can already see it. If you look at the outermost element here, it has navbar expand and then LG. So on the at the large breakpoint, as it's called, this navbar gets expanded, right? So you can see it expands, you know, pretty late at large. So maybe we want it to expand, right? This is the expanded version. This should already happen, maybe, you know, already here, for example. So Bootstrap is using these breakpoints, and it's using that throughout its entire philosophy, so not just with navbar. So quite often you're going to have to deal with that. So it has layout breakpoints. And let me make this a little bit bigger. So you can see here large is 992 pixels. We could change it to small, right? So these are the standard breakpoints that you use in Bootstrap. And so maybe we could say, well, it starts off like this, and you know, already here, for example, it should expand. So we can change the LG to SM. And when we do that, it will already expand at 576 pixels, right? So already here, right? That's faster than here or somewhere here, right? So Bootstrap is mobile first. Does that mean that you have to create your Bootstrap projects mobile first as well? And the answer is no. You can still create your project, desktop first, make it look good on desktop first, and then, make sure that it also looks good on mobile later. Or as you create those components, you can already, check. But it doesn't mean that you have to completely start from mobile first, right? It's just the philosophy that Bootstrap is using. Okay, so another thing that you often want to change is the space between between the component here and the edge of the viewport, right? So right now it's always sitting, pretty close to the edge. There is some space here, of course, but it's always the complete width, as you can see, right? And actually there is a class for this that deals with this. It's the container class in Bootstrap. This is also a class that you're gonna use outside this component. So here it's container fluid, and that has a particular meaning. So let's see, there is a container page here, right? Containers. So there are basically 3 types of classes that you can use. There is also just the container class itself, just container. This is one that you want to use very often. So we can change this from container fluid simply to container. So when you do that, the width of the navbar gets constrained a little bit more, right? So it gets centered a little bit more. And also when you make the viewport smaller, it will sort of adjust itself, right? So it's sitting a little bit more in the center, right? So this is a class that you often want to use in many different situations to sort of constrain the width of the content, because often, on very wide viewports, people are not, like, their eyes aren't focused on this edge part right here, right? People's field of vision is mostly in the center. So you do want to have, you do want to constrain the width of a lot of your content. So this container class is something that helps out very handy with that. Okay, so then in here, let's see what we have. We have a navbar brand. So usually in the navbar, you're gonna have some branding here, the website name. This could also be an image. So let's actually change this to an image with some text. So I'm just gonna use the Bootstrap logo. I'm just gonna paste that here. And I'm gonna save that. Right, so now we have this Bootstrap logo, and this navbar brand class actually just adds, it does certain things. Like it makes sure that this font is a particular size and that there is some space on the right side here, right? So in case we still have those links here, it makes sure that there's still some space between the branding here and the list of links. And that class does some other things as well. Now here, by the way, you can see that the image is not perfectly vertically aligned with the text. This often happens, not just in navbars, but whenever you have like a logo or like an icon next to text, sometimes you have to, add some styles to make it perfectly, vertically aligned. So this would be an example of adding some custom CSS, right? So I would have to, well, let's see. I could give this image, this logo, a particular class, like logo image, right? So I'm just copying this from my notes. I already gave it a custom class, logo image. Then I would go to my CSS. I would select that element, and I need to put it up a little bit, right? I can do that in multiple ways. I can use transform, or I can actually just use a negative margin. That's not a hack. That's actually how it's supposed to work. So if I use a negative margin, it will actually move itself upwards. So you can see it's a little bit higher now, but now it's perfectly vertically aligned, right? So make sure that you have mastered CSS itself as well before you start working with Bootstrap, right? So definitely check out my professional CSS course. The link is in the description. Let's see what else we have in here. That's the navbar brand. Then we have this toggler. This is the actual button that you see, right? This is the navbar toggler, right? So it has a certain icon, actually 3 bars. There's actually an icon here, right? So you can change that. You can change the button, customize the button. Something else that's interesting here perhaps is that it has these data attributes, right? So this is what Bootstrap is using very often when there is a particular click, for example, and something needs to happen. Well, you specify what needs to happen with these custom data attributes. So here it says data BS Bootstrap. So we're basically saying what should be toggled. Well, the collapse class. So collapse class has to do with hiding elements or displaying them in Bootstrap. So the list of links is sitting in an element with a class of collapse. And then also specifically what is the target. So here it's an ID. Well, this particular element with the class of collapse should be, well, collapsed, or should be displayed, or should be hidden, right? So Bootstrap is using these data attributes whenever there's a click and something needs to happen, right? For example, displaying a modal, right? And then below there we have the actual set of links in a UL, which itself is sitting in these collapse, an element with these collapse classes. That's not particularly interesting, but you can imagine, you know, it's a bad idea to start coding this from scratch because you're not really going to remember all of these classes and how to structure the HTML and so on. Better to just copy the example from the docs. Okay, so there are a couple of other things that you usually want to do or that you often want to do. One example of that is making the navbar fixed to the top so that as you scroll, the navbar scrolls with you. So for example, if we have more content in our page, I'm just going to give the body a large height. Right, if we had more content, we would scroll down, right? We don't have that here, but now with the height, we can scroll. So maybe as you scroll, you actually want the navbar to scroll with you. So what you can do on the outermost element is there's a class from Bootstrap called fixed top, right? And you can see when I write the classes here, I actually get suggestions, by the way. You don't get those suggestions out of the box in Visual Studio Code. I'm actually using an extension for that. If you go to your extensions, there's an extension called HTML and CSS. And this one, it can see the style sheets that you're linking to, right? So I'm linking to a CSS style sheet from Bootstrap, so it can see the classes that are available. So it can suggest them as you type them. And that's why I get these suggestions. But if you add fixed top, it will be fixed, right? To the top of the viewport. So as I scroll here, it scrolls with us. Right, so it's going to use position fixed in CSS. And one of the things that it will do is it will take it out of the normal flow, as it's called. So other elements are going to act as if it doesn't exist. So your other elements may shift up when you do that. And so you're going to have some overlap. So in that case, you also may want to add some padding to the top of the body of maybe 48 pixels. That's the height of the navbar here. So then it will be pushed down again, right? We won't see that here because we don't have any other content, but maybe that's the case in your situation where you have other elements here. Okay, another thing I want to show you is how to add a dropdown. So a dropdown is, for example, with features, we could have an additional list of links or just an overview, some kind of list. That's like an overlay when you hover it or when you click on it, right? So how you would do that is you would go to the nav item here that you want to make a dropdown. So you would add some particular classes. Now I could code this from scratch, but in reality, in the real world, you would go to documentation and you would look at their examples and you would just copy them. So I'm just going to copy that. You can find this in the docs, but I just quickly want to show you how that would look like. So I have an example here, right? So here it's still a nav item, but now I also added the dropdown class, and in there we still have a nav link, right? So just like the other nav items, we still have a nav link, but now this also becomes the toggle element. So meaning you click on this and then this is responsible for showing or hiding the overlay, the drop down menu. And let me actually just show you how that looks like. So if I refresh, now we get a certain icon here. And when I click on that, we get this overlay, right? So this list here is what you see. This is what gets toggled if you click on that, right? So this is the actual drop-down menu. These are all classes from Bootstrap. You're not going to remember this, so just copy it from their examples. Again, we're clicking here, so you're going to get these data attributes, right? Because it needs to know what needs to be toggled. And yeah, that's how you can add a drop-down. All right, so last thing I want to show you has to do with a form. Often you want a form in the navbar as well, for example, for searching or, something else. So for this, I want to position the form on the right side. So I'm going to put these back in their default position. Right now they're here. Then we can add a form. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to paste it after this list of links. Right. So it's just going to be a form. And it's going to use some of the Bootstrap classes, right? We have form control and it also has a button. So let's see how that looks like. All right, so then we get this form here. The form is positioned here because it's using margin start auto, which will add as much margin to the left of, left in our case here, or in my case here, as possible, which will push itself all the way to the right, right? And these are just some normal Bootstrap classes like form control, margin end. All right, that's going to be margin on the right side for me. Actually, that's the input, right? So that's the space between the input and the button. The button is, well, very simple. Usually you can actually create the button component from scratch because it has few classes, just btn and then the color or theme. So just btn primary, usually that's the blue color. And yeah, that's how you can add a form in the navbar. And it's responsive as well, but it gets quite cramped here, but it is responsive. Right, it's still visible here. So here you do need to pay attention to when you want to collapse or when you want to expand, right? Because it's mobile first, when you want to expand the nav. So here maybe it's better to use medium. So let's see. Yeah, so now it doesn't get so cramped. It becomes the hamburger menu. Right, so that's how that works.
By the way, if this was helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Also, check out my courses on CSS and JavaScript if you want to take those skills to an advanced level. Because in there, we will build some beautiful real-world projects from scratch so you can see how everything fits together and really master CSS or JavaScript. And I will also release other courses soon like React and Node.js. So if you want to be notified, then make sure you are subscribed to the email newsletter. You can find the link in the description. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you soon.